Hi everyone, so welcome to today's lesson. Today we're going to be looking at rounding numbers. So we're going to be looking at rounding to decimal places and we're going to be rounding to significant figures as well. So let's start off with decimal places. So you may get a question like this: what is 13.723 correct to two decimal places? So we'll look at the technique a bit first. So there's two things we have to really pick out when we get a question like this. One of them is this last digit number and one of them is this decider number. So how do we pick what these are? So our last digit, we pick this by looking at the question. So the question says two decimal places. So we look for the decimal point, which is here, and then we look for two numbers after the decimal point. So that would be this number here. So that forms our last digit. Our decider is the number directly after our last digit. So in this case, this is our last digit. Our decider is a number directly after that. So what are they used for? So you'll see in the example that we use next, our last digit is the last number that appears in our answer. And the decider is used to figure out whether this number moves up or moves down. So in this case, whether this number goes up to 3 or whether it will stay the same as 2. And the way that we decide that is we look at a decider and we see if our decider is greater than or equal to 5. If it's greater than or equal to 5, then in this case, this 2 becomes 3. And if it's less than 5, as it is here, so this 3 is less than 5, this 2 will stay the same. So let's actually go through the example now and get our answer. So let's work through the example now. So we got 13.723 correct to two decimal places. So we'll write it out again. And you can see that I've copied over that diagram that we had in the last slide. So two decimal places. So that's going to help us decide our last digit. So here's our decimal point, 1, 2. So this is our last digit. So we know that this number is going to be the last digit of our answer. And therefore this must be our decider. So we're going to write down everything up to our last digit, so 13.7, because that's all going to stay the same. And then we look at our decider and we say, is our decider greater than or equal to 5? So in this case, our decider is 3, which is of course less than 5. So that means our last digit stays the same. And that is our answer. 13.72 is 13.723 rounded to two decimal places. So let's look at another example now. So now we have 7.45389, and this time we want it correct to three decimal places. So sometimes you might see it written like this, 3dp. That just means exactly the same as before, three decimal places. So we're going to use the same technique. So 3dp is going to help us decide what our last digit is. So here's our decimal point, and we're going to do 3 after that. So 1, 2, 3. This is our last digit, which means this is now our decider. So just like we did before, we're going to write everything up to our last digit because that's going to stay the same. So 7.45. And now we're going to look at a decider. So we're going to look at it and say, is our decider greater than or equal to 5? Well, our decider is 8, which is greater than 5, which means that we move this number 3 up. We add 1 to this number 3. So this number 3, instead of writing 3, we write 4. And that forms our answer. So instead of 7.45389, this number correct to three decimal places is 7.454. So now we're going to look at a different type of example. Instead of rounding to two decimal places, we're going to look at rounding to significant figures. So here we've got a question, 506.7 correct to two significant figures. So you can see we're using the same technique as we did before. We've got our last digit and we've got a decider. Except this time, how we decide what our last digit is has changed. So now it says two significant figures. So instead of counting off the decimal point, we're going to count right from the beginning of the number. So we see we've got 2, so we're going to go 1, 2. And this is what's going to be our last digit. Our decider stays the same. It's the number directly after the last digit. And our rule about whether it's greater than or equal to 5 stays the same as well. So if the decider is greater than or equal to 5, then we add 1 to our last digit. If it's less than 5, then we keep our last digit the same. And when we're writing our answer, we change every number after our last digit to zeros. That'll become a little bit clearer once we go through our example now. So here we have our example. So we got 506.07 and we want this correct to two significant figures. So we use the same technique as we did before. I've put the diagram up here as well. So our last digit, so it's significant figures now, not decimal points, which means we start at the beginning of the number. So we want two significant figures. So 1, 2. This is our last digit, which means that this number 6 becomes our decider. So let's write our answer out. So again, we're going to write every number up to our last digit. So in this case, it's just the number 5. Then we're going to look at our last digit and we're going to say, is the decider greater than or equal to 5? Well, in this case, the decider is greater than 5, so we add 1 to our last digit. And we change every other number. When we're looking at significant figures, we change every other number to a 0. So this 6 becomes a 0. And then we've got a decimal point. This is already a 0. And then the 7 also becomes a 0. And that's how we round to significant figures. So 506.07 to two significant figures is 510.00. So we've just got one more example to go through now. So we've got 6,751 rounded to the nearest thousand. So in order to answer this question, we have to look at the thousands unit in this number. So 6,751, this is our hundreds unit, tens unit, and our single unit. This, of course, is our thousands unit. So our thousand is 6, in other words, 6,000. So we have to look at whether this number is closer to 6,000 or whether it's closer to 7,000. How can we do that? Well, we know this is our thousands unit. We can use this as our last digit. So this is going to be our last unit, our last digit. And this is going to be our decider for this question. So just like we did previously, we're going to look at, is our decider greater than or equal to 5? Well, here our decider is 7. So it's greater than 5, which means that we add 1 to our last digit. So instead of writing 6, we write 7. And that's how we know that it's closer to 7,000. So since we rounded to the nearest thousand, this becomes 7,000. So 6,751 rounded to the nearest thousand is 7,000. That's going to be all for today, guys. So be sure to check back next week for our next lesson in Foundation GCSE Maths. Thank you.